You've always known you were different, not in ways you could easily explain, not in ways that fit neat categories, but different nonetheless. Perceptions that others didn't share, sensitivities that seemed to have no source, abilities that appeared without training, without explanation, without any framework that made sense of them. You've probably dismissed these experiences, told yourself you were imagining things, learned to hide what you perceived because others looked at you strangely when you described it, adapted to a world that insisted your experiences weren't real. But what if they were real? What if the abilities you've carried your entire life weren't imagination or delusion but inheritance? What if the talents you've hidden are exactly what you were supposed to possess, encoded in your genetics, passed down from ancestors whose civilization was erased, but whose capabilities survived in their descendants? The Tartarian bloodline carries more than physical traits. It carries potential, abilities that were common in the civilization before the reset, talents that allowed Tartarians to build what they built, perceive what they perceived, accomplish what they accomplished. These abilities didn't disappear when Tartarian civilization fell. They persisted in survivors. They passed to descendants. They exist today in millions of people who don't understand what they carry or why they experience what they experience. If you've ever felt different in ways you couldn't explain, this investigation is for you. The three abilities Tartarian descendants possess aren't rare supernatural gifts. They're inherited potential, diluted through generations but not eliminated. Abilities you've always had but never understood, until now. The first ability, frequency perception. The first Tartarian ability involves perception of frequencies beyond the normal human range. Modern science defines human perception within specific parameters. We see light between approximately 380 and 700 nanometers. We hear sound between roughly 20 and 20,000 hertz. We feel touch, taste, smell within documented ranges. Anything outside these parameters is officially imperceptible to humans, but Tartarian descendants often perceive beyond these limits. The experience varies between individuals. Some perceive additional colors, wavelengths that shouldn't be visible but somehow are. They describe seeing auras around people and objects, fields of color that others can't detect. They notice when the light in a space feels wrong, when frequencies clash in ways that create discomfort they can't explain to those who don't share the perception. Others perceive sounds beyond normal range. They hear the hum of electrical systems that others insist are silent. They detect high-pitched frequencies that dogs respond to but typical humans can't access. They know when a room contains ultrasonic or infrasonic elements because they feel them as sound, not just as the vague unease that such frequencies cause in typical people. Still others perceive electromagnetic fields directly. They sense the presence of electrical wiring behind walls. They feel the emanations of electronic devices. They know when they're near high-voltage equipment, without seeing it, without hearing it, simply through direct perception of the field itself. These perceptions have been documented throughout history under various labels: clairvoyance, aura reading, electromagnetic sensitivity. Each label carries assumptions that may be incorrect. The perception isn't supernatural. It isn't pathological. It's expanded normal perception, human capability that was once common but has been diluted to the point of rarity. If you possess this ability, certain experiences will be familiar. You've always seen something around people that others don't see. You've learned not to mention it because the responses range from confused to concerned, but the perception persists. Colors or fields or something that doesn't have a good name, present around living things, varying in ways that seem meaningful, though you've never found anyone to explain what the variations mean. Certain spaces feel wrong to you for reasons you can't identify. A room will create discomfort that others don't share. A building will seem to vibrate at a frequency that sets your teeth on edge. You'll need to leave places that others find perfectly comfortable, and you won't be able to explain why. Electronic devices affect you more than they affect others. You get headaches from screens that don't bother the people around you. You can't sleep near certain equipment. You feel something emanating from technology that others insist emanates nothing at all. You may have been diagnosed with conditions that attempt to explain these sensitivities: electromagnetic hypersensitivity, sensory processing disorder, various labels that pathologize what you experience rather than explaining it. But pathology implies malfunction. What if your perception isn't malfunctioning? What if it's functioning exactly as it was designed to function, perceiving ranges that your Tartarian ancestors perceived routinely, ranges that their technology was designed to work with, ranges that modern humans have lost the ability to access? The Tartarian civilization built technology that operated on frequencies beyond modern recognition. The atmospheric energy systems we've documented in previous investigations didn't use frequencies within the normal range of perception. They operated at wavelengths and vibrations that typical modern humans can't detect. The technology would have been invisible, inaudible, imperceptible to most people alive today, but it wasn't imperceptible to the Tartarians. They could see it, hear it, feel it working. Their expanded frequency perception allowed them to build, maintain, and operate technology that required direct perception of forces most humans can no longer access. This is why the technology seems impossible to us, not because it violated physics, but because it operated in ranges we can't perceive. We look at Tartarian devices and see decorative elements because the functional components operated at frequencies we're blind to. Tartarian descendants who retain frequency perception are seeing what their ancestors saw. The auras and fields and frequencies they detect aren't imaginary. They're real phenomena that most humans have lost the ability to perceive. The perception isn't a disorder, it's an inheritance, a window into a range of reality that was once commonly accessible, but has been diluted to rarity. Developing this ability requires attention rather than training. The perception is already present. What's required is recognition and acceptance. Stop dismissing what you perceive. Stop assuming that because others don't share your perception, you must be wrong. Begin documenting your frequency experiences systematically. When you perceive colors or fields around people, note the conditions. When spaces create inexplicable discomfort, record the details. When electronic devices affect you, track the patterns. The documentation will reveal consistency. Your perceptions aren't random. They follow rules you haven't yet identified because you've been dismissing them rather than studying them. Find others who share the perception. Online communities exist where people discuss these experiences. The shared vocabulary they've developed may help you understand and articulate what you perceive. The validation of knowing others experience similar things may help you trust your own perception. And experiment carefully with what your perception reveals. If you see fields around people, notice what correlates with different field characteristics. If you detect electromagnetic emanations, test your perception against known sources. Verify that what you perceive corresponds to measurable phenomena, even if the measurement requires equipment others don't think to use. The ability is real, the perception is accurate. What's required is the confidence to use what you've always had. The second ability, temporal intuition. The second Tartarian ability involves unusual relationship with time. Modern understanding treats time as uniform and unidirectional. It flows at a constant rate from past to future. We experience the present moment while remembering the past and anticipating the future. This framework is so fundamental that questioning it seems absurd. But Tartarian descendants often experience time differently. The experience manifests in various ways. Some have uncanny knowledge of what will happen before it happens. Not vague feelings, but specific information about events that haven't yet occurred. They know who's calling before they answer the phone. They know what someone will say before they say it. They know something is wrong before any evidence appears. Others experience time as more fluid than the standard model suggests. Moments expand or contract in ways that don't match clock times. An hour passes in what feels like minutes. A minute stretches into what feels like hours. The discrepancy isn't simply subjective time perception. It's something deeper, a sense that time itself is behaving differently than it should. Still, others have access to information from the past that they shouldn't possess. They know things about events they never witnessed. They remember details of places they've never visited. They carry knowledge that seems to belong to someone else, some other time, some other life. These experiences have been labeled throughout history: precognition, time dilation, past life memories. Each label carries baggage that may obscure what's actually happening. The experience isn't mystical, it isn't supernatural, it's a different relationship with time. A perception that time's apparent uniformity is an illusion that some people can see through. If you possess this ability, certain patterns will be familiar. You've had experiences of knowing things before they happened that you've learned not to mention. The accuracy was uncomfortable. The implications were disturbing. You've trained yourself to dismiss these experiences because they don't fit any acceptable framework. Time feels different to you than it apparently feels to others. Not just passing quickly when you're engaged or slowly when you're bored. Something more fundamental, a sense that time's flow isn't constant, that it varies in ways others don't perceive. You carry knowledge that doesn't seem to be yours. Information about events, places, people that you have no normal way of knowing. You've wondered if you're somehow making it up, constructing false memories, imagining connections that don't exist, but the knowledge persists. And occasionally it proves accurate in ways that simple fabrication couldn't explain. You may have been diagnosed with conditions that attempt to explain these experiences. Dissociative symptoms, derealization, various labels that treat your perception as disorder rather than ability. But what if time isn't what we're taught it is? What if the uniform flow from past to future is a simplification that describes typical human experience but not universal reality? What if Tartarian descendants perceive time more accurately, see through the simplification, access temporal information that others can't reach? The Tartarian civilization may have understood time differently than we do. The achievements attributed to Tartarians seem impossible, partly because of temporal assumptions. We calculate how long construction should take based on our experience of time's flow. We assume past civilizations experienced time the same way we do. But what if they didn't? What if Tartarian technology included methods of working with time that we've lost? Not time travel in the science fiction sense, but manipulation of how time flows, how events sequence, how duration relates to accomplishment. This would explain construction timelines that seem impossible, not because Tartarians had more workers or better tools, but because their relationship with time itself was different. What would take us decades might have taken them years or months, not through faster work, but through different temporal experience. The ability Tartarian descendants possess, the unusual relationship with time, may be remnant perception of what Tartarians experienced routinely, a glimpse of how time actually behaves when the simplification we've been taught to accept is seen through. The precognitive experiences aren't seeing the future. They're perceiving temporal relationships that exist, but that typical consciousness can't access. The time dilation isn't malfunction. It's accurate perception of time's actual variability. The past knowledge isn't false memory. It's access to temporal information that shouldn't be accessible but is. Working with temporal intuition requires trusting experiences that contradict ordinary understanding. When you know something will happen, note it before it happens. Document your precognitive experiences in writing, so are dated before the events they anticipate. Build a record that demonstrates to yourself the accuracy of your perception. When time feels different, pay attention to the circumstances. What conditions correlate with expansion? What situations produce contraction? The patterns exist. Finding them requires attention rather than dismissal. When you carry knowledge that seems to belong to other times, investigate it. Research whether the information is accurate. Check whether the details correspond to historical reality. The verification may reveal that your temporal intuition accesses genuine information rather than fabricating convincing fantasies. The challenge is trusting perception that contradicts consensus reality. We're trained to believe that everyone experiences time the same way, that precognition is impossible, that memories must come from personal experience. Tartarian temporal intuition contradicts all of this. Accepting the ability requires accepting that consensus reality may be incomplete, but you've always known it was incomplete. You've always experienced things that didn't fit. The ability is real. You've always had it. What's required is the courage to acknowledge and develop what you've been taught to suppress. The third ability, resonant communication. The third Tartarian ability involves communication that transcends ordinary language. Modern understanding treats communication as information transfer through recognized channels. We speak and listen, we write and read, we gesture and interpret. Communication requires encoding information into a medium that another person can decode. But Tartarian descendants often experience communication that bypasses these channels. The experience takes various forms. Some know what others are thinking without any verbal or physical indication, not inference from context or body language, but direct access to mental content. They know what someone will say because they've already perceived the thought. They know what someone feels without any expression revealing it. Others experience profound connection that transfers information without identifiable mechanism. They meet someone and immediately know things about them that shouldn't be accessible. They feel what another person feels as if the emotional state transferred directly. They understand others at depths that conversation couldn't produce. Still others communicate with living systems beyond humans, plants, animals. The living world itself seems to respond to them and transmit information to them. They know when an animal is distressed without behavioral cues. They sense what plants need without signs of deficiency. They feel part of a communicating web that most people don't perceive. These experiences carry labels: telepathy, empathy, plant communication. Each label has been dismissed as fantasy, pathologized as delusion, or commercialized as mystical gift. But the experiences are more common than dismissal suggests, more consistent than delusion would produce, more practical than mysticism implies. If you possess this ability, recognition will be immediate. You've always known things about people that you shouldn't know. Walked into rooms and immediately understood the emotional dynamics. Met strangers and perceived their inner states as clearly as their outer appearance. You've learned to hide this perception because acknowledging it creates discomfort, both in yourself and in those who realize how much you perceive. You've experienced connection that felt like communication, but used no identifiable medium. Moments when understanding passed between you and another person without words, without gesture, without anything you could point to as the carrier of information. You've wondered if you imagined it, but the other person often shows signs of having experienced the same thing. You feel things that aren't yours, emotions that don't match your circumstances, states that entered you from outside rather than arising from within. And you've learned to distinguish between your own feelings and the feelings you've somehow absorbed from others, though you've never found anyone who could explain how such absorption is possible. You've been diagnosed with conditions attempting to explain these experiences: high sensitivity, empathy disorders, boundary problems. The labels describe symptoms without explaining mechanisms, because the mechanism, actual communication outside recognized channels, isn't supposed to exist. The Tartarian civilization apparently communicated in ways we've lost. The coordination evident in Tartarian achievements suggests communication capabilities beyond what we possess. Cities built to consistent plans across continents. Technology deployed globally with matching specifications. Some coordination that seems impossible given the communication technologies we attribute to that era. If Tartarians possessed resonant communication, the coordination becomes explicable. They didn't need telegraph lines or postal systems to share information across distances. They could communicate directly, mind to mind, creating shared understanding without the bottleneck of encoding and decoding information through physical media. The architectural features we've interpreted as decorative may have supported this communication. The domed spaces with specific acoustic properties, the crystalline elements embedded in structures, the geometric patterns repeated across buildings worldwide. If these features created resonant fields that facilitated direct communication, Tartarian coordination becomes not just possible but natural. Tartarian descendants who experience resonant communication are accessing what their ancestors used routinely: the telepathic experiences, the empathic absorption, the communication with living systems. These are fragmentary expressions of a capability that was once fully developed, diluted through generations, but not eliminated, rare but real. Developing resonant communication requires accepting its reality while learning its limits. The ability is real, but it's not what fantasy depictions suggest. You can't read minds like reading books. You can't communicate arbitrary information across unlimited distances. The ability is partial, conditional, developed to different degrees in different individuals. Start by acknowledging what you already perceive, the knowledge of others' states that you've dismissed or hidden, the communication that has passed without words, the absorption of feelings that aren't yours. Stop treating these as impossibilities and start treating them as data. Learn to distinguish between accurate perception and projection. Not everything you think you perceive about others is actually accurate. Some of it reflects your own assumptions, fears, hopes mapped onto others. Developing the ability requires learning which perceptions are genuinely resonant and which are self-generated. Practice with willing partners. Find others who experience similar things and explore together. Test your perceptions against their reports. Discover the conditions under which communication works most clearly. Build understanding through systematic experimentation, rather than assuming you already know how the ability functions. Respect boundaries, both others and your own. Perceiving what others feel creates ethical obligations. Just because you can access information doesn't mean you should. Just because you absorb others' emotions doesn't mean you should remain in situations that flood you with overwhelming states. The ability is real, but like any real ability, it requires development, discipline, and ethical consideration. These three abilities connect. Frequency perception, temporal intuition, and resonant communication aren't separate capabilities. They're aspects of a single expanded consciousness, different facets of a way of being human that was once common but has been diluted to rarity. The frequency perception allows awareness of the fields and forces through which resonant communication travels. The temporal intuition allows access to information across time, including information that arrives through communication from other times. The resonant communication allows connection that transcends the limitations frequency perception reveals. Tartarian descendants often possess multiple abilities, or all three. The same genetic variants that enable one capability enable others. The same expanded consciousness that perceives frequencies also perceives temporal relationships and communicates resonantly. If you recognize one ability in yourself, look for the others. They may be present but unrecognized because you haven't known to look for them. The abilities tend to cluster in individuals just as the physical traits do. You've always had these abilities, not as potential waiting to develop. As active capabilities you've been using your entire life without recognizing what you were doing. Every time you perceived something others couldn't, you were using frequency perception. Every time you knew something before it happened, you were using temporal intuition. Every time you understood someone beyond what words conveyed, you were using resonant communication. The abilities aren't gifts to be granted, they're inheritance to be claimed. You've spent your life thinking something was wrong with you, that you were too sensitive, that you perceived things that weren't there, that you were somehow broken in ways that made you different from normal people. But nothing is wrong with you. You're not too sensitive. You perceive things that are there, things others can't see. You're not broken. You're carrying capabilities that were deliberately diluted, that you were taught to suppress. that you've hidden because no framework existed to explain them. Until now, the suppression of these abilities has been systematic. Every cultural message that dismisses expanded perception as imagination supports the suppression. Every psychiatric diagnosis that pathologizes unusual experience reinforces it. Every social pressure that forces the gifted to hide their gifts maintains it. This isn't accidental. The abilities threaten systems of control that depend on limited human capability. People who perceive frequencies can see the manipulation embedded in media and technology. People with temporal intuition can perceive the lies embedded in constructed history. People with resonant communication can connect in ways that bypass controlled channels. The dilution through genetic mixing address the biological basis, but the suppression continues through cultural programming. Even those who carry the abilities are taught to deny them, hide them, pathologize them. The recovery requires rejecting this programming, accepting that your experiences are real, acknowledging that you perceive what you perceive, regardless of what you've been taught about what's possible. The abilities are your birthright, not supernatural gifts bestowed by external forces. Human capabilities encoded in human genetics, inheritance from ancestors who built a civilization more advanced than the one we inhabit. You carry their genes, you carry their potential, you carry abilities that were once common and could be common again. The Tartarian civilization didn't fall because humans lacked capability. It fell for other reasons we've explored throughout this series. The capabilities survived in survivors. They passed to descendants. They persist in you. Every time you perceive a frequency others miss, you're accessing Tartarian inheritance. Every time you know something before it happens, you're using abilities your ancestors used routinely. Every time you connect with another being beyond words, you're demonstrating what humans can do when Tartarian genetics express. The abilities are real, the inheritance is real, the potential is real, and it's yours. It's always been yours. You just didn't know what to call it. Now you do. What will you do with this knowledge? You can continue hiding what you perceive, continue dismissing your experiences as imagination, continue pretending to be limited in ways you're not, or you can accept your inheritance, develop what you've always had. Connect with others who carry the same potential. Begin the work of recovering what was deliberately suppressed. The three abilities, frequency perception, temporal intuition, resonant communication, aren't the only Tartarian capabilities that may persist in descendants. They're the most common, the most frequently reported, the most clearly documented in the experiences people share. Others may exist, abilities we haven't identified yet, capabilities that await recognition in people who don't yet know what they carry. The recovery of Tartarian potential is just beginning. Each person who recognizes their inheritance joins the recovery. Each ability acknowledged and developed strengthens the whole. You've always had these abilities. Now you know why. Now you know where they came from. Now you know what they mean. The question isn't whether you possess Tartarian inheritance. The question is what you'll do with it. The abilities are waiting. They've always been waiting for you to recognize them, for you to claim them, for you to use them. The inheritance is yours. It's time to accept it.